etc. So I want to say that I'm a philosopher. I've been in a university. I've been reading a lot on Platonism. I don't know if you're familiar with scholasticism. It's a branch of philosophy, religious philosophy, of course. And I'm Jewish. I was brought up Orthodox, of course. And I do really admire your work. I've seen a lot of your debates, your discussions with Dr. Michael Brown. I actually spoke to him, last week. And, I wanted to first ask you a question. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to ask how I can join your organization. What you do really resonates with me, and I do want to be part of such an endeavor.
Yeah, cool.
The first thing I wanted to ask you, though, when it comes to Torah Judaism, right, how do you, for instance, one of the Islamic, I study all the religions, the main religious monotheistic religions, like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, of course. Mm-hmm. I know how to read Gemara. I've been through a lot of Halacha. I've been through a lot of Masechtot also. But my question is, the Islamic criticism on Judaism is the fact that the scriptures have been corrupted. And through the Dead Sea Scrolls, we do see differences and variations in text, etc. Mm-hmm. My question is, and I know you say that the Torah is original and the prophets are only there to aid, so of course I don't think, from my understanding, I don't think you believe in the divinity of the prophets as much as the Torah, right?
Right.
So my question is, how are you personally, for your own self, how are you so certain with the fact that the Torah is unchanging, since it's a divine text, mm-hmm. scripture? So how are you so certain that it's unchanging and that it really pervaded through all those generations?
Mm-hmm. With all the different Sefer Torah we have out there, the biggest difference that we have is the one with the Samaritan text, right? And that's only like 2 mitzvot, and one of them having to do with Mount Gerizim. Apart from that, and I don't really think that makes or breaks our religion, because even Yerushalayim doesn't appear in Torah. So the place that God chooses is not static necessarily. It's a place where Israel chooses to build God's temple. Even though there's slight variations among the Sefer Torah we have out there, there isn't a mitzvah that changes, with the exception of that one of the Samaritans. Only because there's a slight variation, it doesn't break our religion. And in terms of it being divine, I never use that word divine. I don't believe the Torah as we have it today, it was given in Har Sinai like this, right? On Har Sinai, we were given a snippet, and then it was slowly revealed to us, but it's the commandments within the Torah, right? What we call colloquially Torah nowadays is not what the Torah itself calls Torah, right? And when Moshe was commanded to write 13 Sefer Torah, he wasn't commanded to write 13 additions of the 5 books of Moses. He was commanded to write the mitzvot within the Torah. Okay, that's what Torah means. It means instructions. And Rav Saadia Gaon actually says this. He says that when they're told to write the Torah on stones, like in the river, it says, how can they write the whole Torah on stones? And then he says that whenever it says Torah in Torah, it means the commandments within the Torah. Right? So now we're studying here. I don't know if he wrote it there. It was a parish on Sefer Yehoshua, I'm pretty sure. So sure, the instructions came from God in whatever form we have them nowadays. But I don't believe that the Torah that we have nowadays necessarily came to us on Har Sinai in that form. What makes or breaks our religion is if these instructions don't work. It's the emulating of a good God that makes our religion exceptional. Who cares? If there's a slight variation of a certain mitzvah with another group, things like this are bound to happen. But I don't think it's analogous with anything Islam is teaching regarding the Torah being corrupted.
But at the same time, for example, the mitzvahs don't really mean anything outside of the Talmud. And the Talmud relies heavily on scriptural derivations, for instance. Xershah, Hakishes, whatever, and this is all based off scripture. They take the divinity of the Tanakh to basically come to a full understanding of these mitzvahs. I was saying you don't even know what the mitzvahs are unless you have a scripture, right?
What do you mean scripture?
The Tanakh, for instance, for example, they do Kiddushin, right? How do they know what it is in Kiddushin? They do Kifa from the day and they do Xershah, for instance. Or they start to do, for example, Kalashava between Avarivriya and etc. But I'm saying this is all based off scriptural derivations, and they have to presuppose the divinity of scripture that God is interacting and telling them through the Tanakh, for instance.
So Chazal have the authority to establish laws based on whatever they want to, right? And even things that they consider to be derived, not necessarily, from Torah itself or from Nach, right? Like the notion of Oneg Shabbat, that is still called a D'Rabbanan, right? I mean, it's not called a Doraita, unless it's something they call an asmachta, right? So an asmachta is like a rabbinic practice with a biblical source, but it's not necessarily straight, literally from the Torah. So, like Chazal would never understood Tanakh outside of Torah to be divinely inspired, right? This notion of divinely inspired is more of a Christian idea. Only because they happen to take a pasuk from Tehillim or a pasuk from Sefer Yoshua and make it into a halacha, but doesn't mean that it was explicitly in the text like a halacha. They elevated, they chose. And we have halachas built off of gematria, like just because like Chazal chose it to be this way. But they could create gezeros and takanas any way they want to. But that doesn't mean that these gezeros actually have a source in Nach. But because of lo saso, we're commanded to obey whatever they tell us to do, as long as it's not unethical. But it wouldn't be considered an interpretation of Scripture. It would just be like abiding to rabbinic law.
But how would you know, for example, what the film is, or the Sitza says, outside of scriptural derivation, exegesis? You know that it needs to come down to these influences.
Right.
Or they're just making it up and claiming. I'm not making it up in the bad way, but like they're putting their own interpretations on what they think it is.
Mm-hmm. So Rambam talks about the 14 shirashim, on how he classifies the mitzvah in Sefer Mitzvot. And then there's the 13 principles of exegesis on how laws are extracted also from the Torah. But that doesn't mean that the vast majority of laws come straight from the Torah. I like the Rashbam and the notion of what's an ot, or when it says Totafot Benenecha, he says that is clearly symbolic and it doesn't mean tefillin, but Chazal chose to illustrate that mitzvah and make it applicable to us on a daily basis. So it's still binding because it came from Chazal. The Rashbam said that his great-grandfather Rashi screwed up in his Parish of the Torah because he set out to write a commentary straight on the Peshat, and then he failed because it went off on Agadot and Midrashim. So he said that he was going to write the most rational, Parish of the Torah. And this is his complete approach on a concept that people walk around thinking that the notion of tefillin are in some way fully understood in the Torah. There's no way. I mean, I wear tefillin, but I wear it because Chazal tells me to wear it, not because I actually believe that the pasuk means that I have to wear tefillin. Now, I've heard every argument, which way and every way, on what's an ot, right? It says it'll be a sign for you. A sign is clearly something you see. I know the arguments, but I'm not going to say that that pasuk can't be understood without someone wearing boxes on his head and on his arm, right? I mean, there's also like Basar V'Halav, right? Basar V'Halav, like, is that from the Torah, or is it rabbinic, right? It really depends who you follow. The way it's done nowadays is completely rabbinic, because it says that it's a kid from its mother's milk, right? Or don't cook a kid in his mother's milk. Nowadays, like when you eat a cheeseburger, but that milk didn't necessarily come from the mother of the hamburger you're eating. You know what I mean? So it for sure falls in the rabbinic, but the average rabbi walks around saying, no, it's fully from the Torah. It's not necessarily from the Torah. It's more like an asmachta. See, the problem is nowadays nobody wants to keep anything unless they're convinced that it was all given in Har Sinai. But this whole notion that all of Torah Sheba'al Peh was given in Har Sinai is what the mystical rabbis use to convince people that if they don't keep Torah Sheba'al Peh, God's going to punish them. But they never use the reason what people like the Rambam give for even believing in Torah Sheba'al Peh to begin with. And that's Parshat Shoftim, the mitzvah of lo tasur, of not straying from the right to the left of what Chazal instruct. So something doesn't have to be from the Torah to be binding, right? If it was instituted by people who have smicha and the Sanhedrin, it's just as binding as it was from the Torah. The only distinction is that if you have a safek on how you execute the law, right, we have the principle of safek the Rabban the Hakel and safek the right to the Chumrah. That's the only distinction, but they're both binding, right? But the primitive mind, like for example the Rabbi Mizrahi crowd, they have to walk around believing that everything, even like the shiur that your Rebbe gave last week was given in Har Sinai in order to want to keep it, because they have a primitive understanding of halacha. So this is
you think, for example, Rambam or the Sadi Gaon or the Rambam, you think they understood it the way you're putting it down?
Absolutely. And that's what the Rambam writes. In the first paragraph of Hilchos Bavin, he says, based in a Gadol Sheba Yerushalayim, have Iker Torah Sheba'al Peh. That is they did Hagadol on the Lishkat HaGazit, that is the Iker of Torah Sheba'al Peh. They are Torah Sheba'al Peh. And even the Rambam says, that we're writing what's called Halach LeMoshe Sinai, that's only 30 laws, right? Only 30 laws of the thousands of laws that appear in Torah Shabbat Peh that were given in Har Sinai. And even amongst those 30 laws, people debate on them because he says there was 30 because there were mitzvot that were never, or there were halachot that were never like argued upon. So like the source had to be given, to Moshe and Har Sinai. But then there's other rabbis who do argue on it, who prove that the Rambam was wrong, so it's even less than 30 laws. So I'm not of the opinion that all of Torah Shabbat Peh, or the bulk of it, or even 30 laws that were given in Har Sinai. Why? Because we don't need to believe it was given in Har Sinai to feel compelled to keep it, because we're commanded to listen to the judges of those days.
Of course. But then, so having this framework, I like your framework. I think, honestly speaking, I went to yeshivas full time, obviously. And I learned a bunch of other yeshivas. I found personally my strongest areas are in philosophy. I can prove the existence of God without any doubt. I can show how Christianity falls apart because of reality and because of idolatry. I can show how taking God's nature, he can never become man. I can prove these things 100% on truth tables. I actually am writing my dissertations.
That's conjecture. You can't prove this 100%. This is...
No, you could.
This is like the Lawrence Kellerman argument, right? Like the Kuzari argument.
No. Those are all inductive arguments. I work off first principles, deductive arguments, syllogisms. So yeah, I can prove 100% that taking into account the nature of a necessary entity, it can never manifest itself contingently. It can never become contingent in its essence. So to say that Jesus was God, or to say that there's any sort of divinity ascribed to anything contingent, I would say that that's 100%.
Wait. This is more like the argument of Mordechai, but that itself is conjecture. For example, if someone talks about how God does appear to people like mamish in human form in the Torah, and even Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pekuda, he says that God wouldn't hold someone accountable because he believes in some form of anthropomorphic understanding of God, because it's in the text. Now, the Rambam reinterprets it and says that any time that someone appears to God in person in Scripture, it's in a vision, because it would be a limiting of God, right? But that's more of philosophy. I accept it, but I'm not going to say that this is 100% proof. The problem in that we have to deal with of God doing things that work outside the Rambam's understanding of what God can or can't do. So this is why I'm not so hard on Christians. Because if I'm hard on Christians, then I have to throw Kabbalists under the bus also. Because
and actually, I would, personally speaking. I think mysticism, concepts of Simpson, concepts of, for instance, the attributes, spheres, I would say that's 100% idolatry under my metaphysical system. And I'm not making the system up. I think the system goes back to Aristotle, Plato, and you can go back to Parmenides and stuff. It can go back way further, pre-Socratics even. And I think I can actually send you my book. My book I'm writing it right now. It's 50 pages long. I can send it to you. Tell me what you think about it. Sure. Everything 100% outlined over there. I think you'd enjoy it.
I agree with you, by the way.
I think Islam would fall apart for that reason also, because the Quran specifically is an attribute of God. And I think the Quran contains contingent concepts like man, dogs, horses, whatever. So if you say that these contingent entities are attributes of God, then you're making the same mistake that Christians are. So I think the Jew would have to reinterpret most of those texts. And that's how I would say the person has no issue with believing that the Tanakh is not divinely inspired the same way the Christians think. And I would take your perspective. I think that's the most reasonable. But then there's one question that would be left for me, is why there has to be falsifiability. So in your opinion, what do you think would be the reason for why you'd have to trust Judaism? What argument would push Judaism above everything else? Yeah, I don't like Lawrence Kellerman's argument, a chain of tradition.
This is all faith. And I have faith just like a Muslim has faith, just like a Christian has faith. But the difference is, if you're looking for a belief system that has an ethical framework, you're behooved to go with what's older. Islam and Christianity, or the New Testament and the Quran, that really don't add anything ethical to the narrative. They just add fluff, right? Where the ethics come straight from the Torah. So, that's my biggest argument for people to want to become Jewish or follow the Torah. And of course, that includes Torah Shabbat Peh as well, because we have to listen to the judges. But that's it. It's just religion. If I find another religion that makes me a better person, I'm going to join that religion. I think Judaism keeps you more ethically consistent just because all the major monotheistic religions are built off it. I agree with what you're saying in terms of your philosophical argument, but I believe that it's still opinion. The Torah doesn't classify these ideas. It doesn't tell us what God is or what God is not, right? And also, like the Sanhedrin, there's a lot of people, for example, Chazal, believe that God had a shape, right? Rashi and his students also believe that God had a shape. God wore tefillin, God wore talit. Now, all these ideas were basically shut down by the Rambam in the Hilchos Tshuva. He says that someone who believes that God has a shape, he loses his Hilchot Olam Haba, right? And then the Ravid steps in and says, how can he say that when your rabbi is bigger than the Rambam that believe that God has a shape? I don't believe that God has a shape. However, I don't consider it heretical to believe it. I just think it's foolish, right? So something could be foolish and ignorant and not be idolatrous and heretical.
By heretical, I mean something that's scripturally prohibited. That's what, in my understanding, heresy is. There's no heresy, there's no scripture. Scripture defines heresy. So yeah, it wouldn't be heretical. But I would say that anyone that believes in the fact that, for example, Jesus was the incarnation of God, or that the Quran is an attribute of Allah, anyone who believes this will devolve to complete denying logic. They're believing in the contradictory propositions. They believe, for example, that P represents a proposition. They believe in P and they believe in not P at the exact same time. And yeah, so what I'm saying is, I don't think it's a heresy because Scripture prohibits it. I think it's a heresy because ultimately it undermines your logical faculties. It basically it pushes you into thinking that there's no such thing as truth because you believe in two contradictory propositions. Mm-hmm. And if there's two contradictory propositions that are true, logic will fall apart. And then you have no basis to believe in anything, including Scripture. And in that regard, it makes you a heretic. But I would think that it takes away your capability to reason anything.
No, that makes sense. It depends on how you explain it. I mean, if someone believes that Yashka is just the earthly, incarnation of a heavenly God. I mean, just like he appears in Nach that many times, he's not some sort of separate God. I see that as gray area. I mean, Chazal never mentioned it. I mean, Chazal never mentioned Christians and, what they believe, right? I mean, Chabad teaches that a Rebbe is a yatzmut and a goof, right? I mean, how is that different from Christianity? But I'm not going to call them heretical just because the court didn't establish it. In other words, in terms of heresy, who's a man, who's an apikoros, who's a kosher, there's categories that someone has to fall into that were established by Chazal. And if Chazal will never mention Christianity, then it's hard to label them as idolaters. Now, clearly, a Catholic is an idolater. A traditional Christian is an idolater. But someone who believes in Torah B'Ktav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, but happens to believe that Yashka is Mashiach and an earthly, representation of the heavenly God, I don't know how that, according to Chazal, would be considered idolatrous. According to the Rambam, 100%. I mean, the Rambam believed Christianity was idolatry, and he believed that Islam wasn't. And I disagree with him. Yes, I believe Islam is idolatry, and Christianity isn't. Right? Or at least Messianic Judaism. Yeah. I mean, I have a video called Islam is Idolatry, where he was actually like a Dat Yachid at his time. Almost, like all the rabbis at his time held Islam to be idolatrous, and the Rambam was the first one to say that it wasn't, and then everyone sort of started posketing by the Rambam. Ashkenazim always held that Christianity was an idolatry, because of Tosfos, and then, finally the Ramah, where they held that Christianity is not idolatry for Gentiles, but it is idolatry for Jews. But in the Meir, he said it's not idolatry for anyone. And I bring all these sources. Just type in Islam as idolatry. I'm told Judaism.com because they took the video down.
Personally, the reason why I like, for instance, philosophy and metaphysics logic, is because it basically helps you distinguish between truth and falsehood. So just knowing philosophy and logic, I think Islam and Christianity would 100% fall apart. That's what makes it easy. That's what I'm saying. It leaves you, not only because of ethics, I would say, you can add on to the fact that they propose complete contradictions. So, for instance, I wanted to share with you one of my proofs. It's not my proof. I actually read a bunch of people that cultivated this proof. It's called a Thomistic proof, and St. Thomas Aquinas actually speaks about it, and he actually got the entire proof from Ibn Sina. He developed it from Ibn Sina, and it's called the proof from the Ente Defense, one of his works. Basically goes like this: that everything that exists is composed of it's a composition of existence and its essence. For instance, I can see a bucket and I can say, oh, okay, I understand a bucket is the whole thing, but there's nothing about the fact that it's a bucket that entails that it must exist. I can imagine that every bucket doesn't exist necessarily, Mm-hmm. I can imagine everything in the physical world, its essence is different. It's not the same thing as its existence, right? So basically anything that has an essence, its existence must be bestowed upon it by something else that's already in existence. Right? So, for example, a car, it has an essence in the mind of the person that's making it, and then he actualizes it and brings it into existence. Mm-hmm. And this goes for everything that's physical. Right? The earth, you can even say, I can imagine a world where it would look this way. Different arrangements of particles or subatomic quarks, whatever it is. So you see, nothing materially speaking, its essence is its existence, because it can always be something else. So necessary existence is not implied by understanding the thing. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is, what brings everything into existence? And you have to say it's something which in essence is its existence. There's no distinction between essence and existence. It simply is subsistent being. That's all it is.